Sup you beautiful people. Hope you've had a fantastic day. Welcome back to another new episode of What If Naruto was taken by Yoda and trained to become a Jedi Knight. If you guys enjoy this what if, comment down below and let me know. And go ahead and check out other what ifs in the channel after watching this video. Don't forget to subscribe and leave a like, and also share this video with your friends. So now let's start this video. Supreme Chancellor's Office, 4 days after the Battle of Renvar. The long battle at Renvar beginning to draw to a close. The 7th Corps was now conducting only mop-up operations against smaller droid holdouts, while Admiral Darahan took command of the 10th Army to continue Operation Full Hammer. The garrisons had been warned of the Republic's planned invasions, and within a week or two the offensive would eventually stall. Sidious looked down at the reports from Renvar, examining them in extreme detail, and his scowl couldn't be any larger than it already was, but after a few moments of his seething, it twisted into a sick and malevolent smile. That boy is becoming far too powerful, the Supreme Chancellor thought as he shifted through the various reports. The blonde Jedi had shifted the tide of the battle by simply arriving. His presence alone were enough to rally the demoralized and outmatched Republic forces, and his skill on the battlefield tipped the scales fully. Adding to this, Ross and the other commanders, the 10th Army, also turned the tide of the battle. These subversive methods have proven ineffective. I will have to deal with him more directly, Palpatine thought as he picked up another datapad. Had Naruto just a few more years of experience and skill, Sidious was unsure if Dooku would have won their heated duel, and even had he proven victories, it would be unlikely he would have escaped from this upstart clone commander, King, as he had taken to being called by his comrades. He had proven to be far more capable than anticipated possible for any clone. He had managed to battle Dooku, a former Jedi Master, to a standstill. Even if Dooku was exhausted from his encounter with Naruto, he should still be more than capable of taking on a non-force sensitive clone. Palpatine again scowled at that. If there were more clones like King in Naruto's forces, then it would pose a serious threat to his plans. Sidious now realized what Naruto had seen in the 497th on Geonosis. He knew why the boy had requested they be placed under his command. He was hoping that Naruto constantly fighting on the front lines would eventually get him killed, causing other Jedi to lose hope and also fall to the droid onslaught. But Naruto had proven to have far more potential than even Dooku had warned him of. In the end, his efforts had only empowered the blonde, and had even gotten Naruto promoted and given access to the archives restricted only to Jedi Masters, furthering his growth. At the start of the war, Sidious believed that only 2 Jedi, Mace Windu and Grand Master Yoda, were a serious threat to him and his plans, and they were the most powerful in the order. Now he was beginning to think that this list would require an addition if Naruto Uzumaki became any more powerful. Topoka City, Kamino, 16 days later. All this rain is insufferable. Naruto grumbled as he stood at the edge of one of the many busy hangars, watching the droplets fall endlessly as the seas rose to mass heights, before crashing down onto the many support structures that held the whole city up. This mission to train a new legion was actually Naruto's first trip to Kamino, and the Jedi Master had quickly discovered that he loathed this planet and its incessant wetness. Waiting here while the war waged on across the galaxy was also torturous, but these were the Chancellor's orders, and Naruto wasn't willing to let an entire legion of new troops be thrown into battle unprepared. The docking bays had been busy all day. Dozens of acclimators and star destroyers were taking off every hour as the next batch of clones had completed their training. Despite losses in the war, the Grand Army of the Republic now stood almost 2 million clones strong. Separatist advances in the Outer Rim were grinding to a halt as elite clone reinforcements began arriving across the galaxy to aid local planetary defense forces and irregular units. It was a little under halfway through the 5th month of the Clone War, and Naruto was beginning to think that what the galaxy had seen up until now was just a calm before the storm, and the battles were about to become ludicrously more intense. It was no longer a rush to occupy undefended systems, or to win over the favor of neutral systems leaning this way or that. The battle lines had been drawn, and it looked to Naruto that every battle would look like Bestina Renvar. Looks like you're sitting pretty, up and about so casually. I shouldn't be surprised considering you heal faster than a Ferrero. He heard as he turned around to find Siri smirking at him. Naruto rolled his eyes as he turned to look back at the rain. Please tell me you're here to spirit me away from this force-forsaken watery hellhole. Naruto questioned as Siri nodded with a laugh as she sauntered up to stand beside him. Naruto was never one for extreme weather. Yeah, but I'm also here to inspect the new clone legion. It will be under my command since you took the 497th from me just to protect your sorry ass. Siri joked, but something caused Naruto to frown. Siri noticed his reaction and raised an eyebrow. Something wrong? Don't tell me soaking up all this water has made your thick skin go soft. She questioned as Naruto sighed, turning his head slightly back to look inside the hangar where the new rookies were carrying out their assigned duties. They're green, Siri. The Kaminans didn't teach them a damn thing about real combat. All they have done is sent them through simulation and simulation, but we all know that real combat is nothing like the simulation. It's like they're drones who only need orders. Naruto complained as Siri slowly nodded, understanding what he was saying. Supervised by galaxy-renowned bounty hunters or not, many of them will get killed the day they step foot on a battlefield. Naruto predicted a dire future that for these shinies. The first group sent not long after Geonosis had the advantage of having most of their training complete before the war began. But these clones had been rushed out the door by the Senate. Sure, they were more capable than most irregulars, but they needed some proper combat experience before being thrust into a major battle, which would likely be the whole of the foreseeable future. They needed to start out small and make their way up. Otherwise, the Republic would just be feeding these poor souls still wet behind the ears into a meat grinder. What do you propose? Siri questioned as the two began to make their way into the facility, heading to where Siri would find the new clones. Naruto hummed at that question as he thought about what he could possibly do, before an idea entered into his mind. Nothing concrete yet, but it would seem there would be some kind of system to assign tasks by rank and skills, rather than just assigning them to anyone. You cannot teach a person with a one-size-fits-all mentality. Take Fang, for example. I wouldn't trust him to even be near any sort of explosive device, but unless I know he's coming beforehand, I would never be able to tell you if he was sneaking up on me. Naruto stated as Siri raised an eyebrow at that. Oh? Was Siri's only response as Naruto nodded. Siri found that when Naruto's train of thought was on a roll, it was best not to interrupt him, otherwise he might lose it or forget about it altogether. He was always scatterbrained like that. She'd long lost count of how many times as a youngling that Naruto had forgotten his training saber, after being reminded how to properly tie his robes, or to show the proper respect to his masters. It would take time, but I think we should categorize missions into subcategories. Allow the new recruits to take on the slightly easier missions to gain a bit of real experience, before taking on more difficult tasks. At least in that area I don't expect everyone to be a master of everything. By doing so we can minimize the casualties and allow them to gain experience for harder missions. Naruto explained as Siri nodded. Above all else, Naruto hated senseless bloodshed. He would save lives whenever he was able to, and this was just one way to save lives. Yeah, but I don't think it'll be that easy to define missions as easy, especially in wartime. Siri commented as Naruto nodded to himself as the two entered the communications hub, where one Ross Darahan was waiting for them. Good to see that you're doing well, General. Ross commented as he turned to Siri, who seemed less cold towards him. And I see that you have less of a stick up your ass. Naruto replied back with a smile. Siri chuckled at his response as Ross's brows curled in amusement. Even after an impalement, Naruto was able to crack a joke. You're not very professional for a general, Uzumaki. Ross stated as Naruto waved off his lackluster attempt at a comeback, before moving to talk to one of the Kaminins. Ross shook his head dejectedly as Siri chuckled at his expense. You know, he's right. Siri commented, getting Ross' attention. Not you too, Ross groaned at her with a pained expression, but Siri shook her head. No, I mean it and I think he does too. You have become less callous. It's easy enough just to tell just by being around you. You're a lot thoughtful about your actions. Siri commented as Ross blinked at that. Had he really changed that much? His casualty rate had been greatly reduced, over 20%, but he thought this was just a result of him becoming a better commander. I have improved at fighting the separatists. Ross thought deeply on this. He'd simply thought it was that his tactics and strategies had evolved from fighting poorly equipped pirates and bandits, to being more used to fighting a military force with greater manner, droid power than the Republic. He hadn't observed a change in his feelings towards his comrades until recently, but it was apparent when Ross gave a little introspection. Prior to the war, he cared little for those under his command, but now every life mattered at least a bit. There were some, like Naruto, whose might be more valuable to the war effort than an entire legion of clones, but it wasn't about weighing the value of life to victory anymore. He found he couldn't just throw away soldiers left and right. Glancing towards the blonde Jedi general, Ross's face had become a bit of a confused smile. It's kinda cute when you're thinking hard. He was broken out of his thoughts by Siri, who was grinning. He has that impact on people, you know. What? He questioned her as Siri looked towards Naruto with a fond smile, causing Ross to sigh lowly. If only she would smile like that towards him. Naruto has a strange effect that seems to follow him. Those around him often change for the better. He seems to bring out the best in everyone. She stated as Ross took in what she said, and he found her argument quite compelling. Yes, that he does. He agreed before he shook his head. He had forgotten the reason why he had come. This is fine and all, but we have more pressing matters to attend to, General Uzumaki. Ross stated as he pulled Naruto's attention back towards him. Naruto rolled his eyes as turned towards Ross. And what would that be? Naruto questioned as Ross nodded and pulled out a datapad, handing it to Naruto. The Separatists, after a string of victories in the southern outer rim, have installed a listening post somewhere in this sector. High Command believes they are using this post to stage an attack on Coruscant. The Chancellor has ordered us to investigate it, take out any. Ross stated as Naruto raised an eyebrow at that. Seems like a simple mission. Why didn't they send anyone else? Naruto questioned. Surely there were better things he could be sent to do. The orders came down from the top. Not to mention that the Chancellor has a gag order on this. Ross stated as Naruto narrowed his eyes at that. If that was true, then that would mean that he would have a limited amount of resources for this mission. Our acquisition forces. Naruto questioned Ross. 2 acclimators and their complement, so roughly 3 legions. The memo said that large groups of ship attract undesirable attention. Ross said with an air of disbelief. Not entirely untrue in the core, but those last mutterings caused Naruto to finish Ross's thought. But very unlikely in the Rishi maze. He had expected a small force, but only 2 acclimators. Either Kamino wasn't that important, or this listening post wasn't considered too much of a threat. Considering that Kamino was invaluable to the Republic, Naruto opted to believe the latter option. Perfect, he thought. This was just the kind of operation he was hoping for as he moved towards the comms console, typing in a few commands to Topoka City's main computer. Very well, we'll gather the 497th and the 644th. Just 2 legions should be enough for a blue milkron like this if we have 2 Jedi. He ordered as Siri lifted an eyebrow. The 644th. Never heard of that legion. She commented as Naruto began to smirk. That's because it's new. Come on. Naruto said with a grin as he beckoned Ross and Siri to follow him to the staging area. Arriving, they saw the 644th already marching in a tight formation before coming to a halt, waiting to load up into their acclimator transport. Fully trained and ready to fight, it was a brand new legion of clones that had never saw combat before. The reflections off of their piercing white armor shined brightly into the eyes of the 2 observers. I think they actually got the formation right this time. The 3 heard as they turned to see Ahsoka walking up to them, smiling warmly. In the 2 weeks they had been here, she had become the de facto drill sergeant of the 644th under Naruto. At least until they were properly transferred into the 10th Army. Formation isn't everything, Ahsoka. It's maintaining it that matters. Lesson 76. Naruto said as Ahsoka pouted at his remark while Ross nodded in agreement. Proper formation showed little more than the discipline of a unit, but that mattered little in the heat of battle. If they can keep the same formation under separatist fire, then they have true discipline. Don't start, you two. I think you have done a wonderful job, Ahsoka. Siri praised the young Padawan. She held little combat experience compared to proper Jedi, but if she managed to get 76 tidbits of advice from an experienced commander like Naruto, she was already leagues ahead of the other prospective Padawans for the coming war. At least someone sees my hard work. The Padawan stated, thanking the older Jedi. The group's attention was pulled away as they heard the sound of an acclimator slowly pulling up, docking with the city, allowing the Legion to board the vessel. I didn't realize that they would be here this quick. Naruto stated as Ross coughed in his hand. I had it all set prior to coming here. I had a feeling you would want to use the 497th, so they're already on board another acclimator in orbit. Ross stated as Naruto nodded at that. He should have realized that Ross would have it all set out. The man was a genius with an uncanny knack for bureaucratic army matters. It was half the reason Naruto kept him around in the beginning. Then what are we waiting for? We better get a move on and deal with this. Naruto stated as he turned to Ahsoka and smirked. Stay out of trouble while I'm gone, Ahsoka. Naruto stated as the Padawan chuckled. I have no idea what you mean by that. She stated as Naruto shook his head. Yes, you do. He responded as he and Ross made their way towards the ship. Siri sighed as she saw the event unfold as Ahsoka frowned. She did not want Naruto having to head out to a missing so soon after he had just almost died at the hands of the Sith. Is everything okay? Siri questioned the Togruta teen after she noticed her frowning and deep in thought. It's just that he's so careless. He almost died a few weeks ago and now he's up and acting like it never happened. How can he just do that? Does he not care about his own well-being? The Padawan to be stated as Siri nodded at that before she turned to look at the blonde Jedi's back. He does care about himself, but more importantly he cares for others far more. I know it seems weird because he's so good at it, but Naruto doesn't like war. Part of it is just his nature, but due to Naruto's connection to the Force, he is more attuned to the suffering of others. He hates that people are dying for something that could be so easily fixed. If the Republic would just recognize the Confederacy, this war would be over. Peace is a noble aspiration, but that doesn't mean you should shy away from a fight to preserve it. Ahsoka nodded at this in total agreement. You couldn't show up the front lines against the Separatists and end up cowering to their droids. She was amped up and ready to finish her initiate trials and build her own lightsaber. Siri noticed this misinterpretation of her words and moved to correct it. Actually, fighting off an aggressor is sometimes the only way to preserve peace. Naruto learned that the hard way on Mandalore. Siri tried explaining, but Ahsoka had already chimed in. What happened on Mandalore? The Togruta youngling blurted out with a mix of frustration and enthusiasm, Siri realizing that Naruto hadn't discussed the events on Mandalore with her all that much, if at all. Well, the original mission was to just protect the Duchess Satine, her family, and their political entourage as much as possible, but almost as soon as they landed they fell under attack from her enemies. Concordia, Mandalore's system, 14 years ago. Incoming. A Mandalorian pilot shouted as the transport he was piloting was hit. On board the transport, young Naruto Uzumaki struggled to keep his balance. Everything had gone to hell when the rebels had intercepted their transports that were carrying the Duchess. The pilots had done their best to evade the enemy, but there were too many of them. Brace yourselves. He heard Plo Koon shout as everyone readied themselves for the impact. The pilots did their best to make an emergency landing, but the transport shook violently as they impacted the ground. Overheard rebel fighters flew above, their mission finished as now gunships carrying insurgents quickly began to descend upon the group of transports that were shot down. Damn. Mikkel whispered to himself. This was it, they were going to die. They were outnumbered and outgunned, and the Jedi would not do anything but defend the Duchess, even if it meant brokering some sort of peace. He would not have that. He balled his hands into a tight fist, thinking of what he could do. Are you okay? He heard the young blonde Jedi speak to the Duchess's sister, and an idea quickly formed in his head. He swiftly and silently tore open the small cuts on his head and leg, causing a not insignificant amount of blood to pour out of them. Sir, are you injured? One of the loyalist guards questioned him as he shook his head. Yes, and I don't think I'll be of any use out there. Mikkel answered, grunting in false pain. He wasn't all that injured, but he had to appear as if he was. But sir, what about the Duchess? The guard questioned him. Mikkel had been the commander, the brains behind the war on their part. If he wasn't capable of leading them, then who will? I leave her in the hands of the Jedi. They can get us out of this mess, I'm sure of it. He stated as he turned to look towards Naruto, who frowned at his words, but he knew that they were the best shot they had. I'm sorry, Captain Sun, but we are not participating in this war. Our mission is to defend the Duchess, not fight the war for you. Plo Koon intervened, but Naruto thought differently. He would help the Duchess. But master, if we help them we can end this war quickly. Naruto argued as Plo Koon frowned slightly. What Naruto said was true, but that was not their mission. We cannot intervene. Plo Koon stated. To be frank, Master Jedi, just by being near the Duchess you have intervened in this war. Don't be so naive to think that these rebels won't shoot you just as eagerly as her. Mikkel stated, smirking slightly as he saw the blonde Jedi tighten his fist. He's right, Master. We can't just sit here. Those people are suffering and dying out there. There's no time for talk or protocols. We need to take action, now. Naruto demanded, ready to take the field as the guards themselves readied their weapons. The insurgents would be upon them any moment. We need your help, Master Jedi. Mikkel pleaded Plo Koon, who again frowned. However, Naruto shook his head before he opened the door of the transport. Follow me. He shouted as he ignited his saber, jumping out of the transport with the guards following after him, ready to do battle with the enemy. Plo Koon sighed at Naruto's brashness. The Order would not be pleased with Naruto's action. Nonetheless, Naruto was his Padawan and his responsibility. He was also supposed to protect him as well. The Elder Master reached for his saber and moved to rescue his student. Present time. So that Mikkel's son guy, he pretty much tricked Naruto into fighting in the war. Ahsoka questioned Siri, who looked back fiercely as she nodded. The youthful and naive Naruto had been coerced into fighting any battle Sun wanted, really. Captain Sun was far more intelligent than he let on. He never let this side of him show in front of Satine or the other Jedi, keeping it solely between he and his personal forces, including Naruto. Thankfully, he had been given a diplomatic position after the war, so Siri was less motivated to carve him into pieces for turning her preteen foster brother into a war veteran. In regards to Ahsoka's question, she didn't want to cause any more trouble than she already had in the past, so she decided to deflect the question. Mikkel's son is a dangerous man with a dangerous craving for power. He's a genius strategist and a master manipulator, and is likely the main factor as to why Satine's loyalists won the Civil War in the first place. He might even be smarter than Ross. This news shocked Ahsoka. Naruto might not gotten along with him, but he'd always held Ross's genius intellect in high esteem. So Naruto became the warrior he is because of everything that happened during the Mandalorian Civil War. But how he is still a pacifist. She had been told that the Jedis were peacekeepers in general, and that taking up arms unnecessarily wasn't the Jedi way, nor was using violence as a solution, but Naruto. He's willing to fight to ensure others do not have to. He's trying to minimize the suffering felt by the galaxy. Many times he has risked his life to save a single clone, when most Jedi generals and commanders don't even blink an eye. To him all that matters is saving lives, and if taking up arms and using violence is the only way, then he shall do just that. Siri elaborated, leaving Ahsoka more confused than before. For as long as she had known Naruto, this was something she wasn't aware of. Well, I'd best get going. Siri stated as she began to head towards the ship, leaving Ahsoka to her own thoughts, as the two Jedi generals embarked on yet another mission. On board the Aken, in orbit above Kamino. What's the estimate on the enemy's strength? Naruto questioned Ross, who looked down at a datapad. Totally unknown, but it should be light. It's just a listening post. Even if it is heavily guarded, 2 legions should be enough to capture it, as you said before. Ross answered as he went through the information. There wasn't much other than the location and their objective. Quite frankly, he himself didn't understand why the Chancellor wanted Naruto to deal with this. This seemed like a mission for someone who was below their ranks. Something seems odd. Naruto commented as Ross looked up from the datapad, an eyebrow raised. True that the mission was odd for someone so high in rank, but it was being kept tight-lipped. Was there something that High Command knew that they didn't? What do you mean? Ross questioned as Naruto frowned, watching the troops load onto the transport. What I mean is that look, I don't want you to think I'm thinking too highly of myself, and I'm sure as hell glad they pulled me off that watery wonderland. But why was I pulled out of drill supervision and given orders to disable a listening post? Well, I'm technically still recovering on paper. Any experienced Jedi Knight given command of 2 legions should be able to take out even a heavily entrenched listening post. They also chose not 1, but 2 Jedi Masters and the most renowned admiral in the entire Republic Navy to lead the attack, and if the Separatists are made aware of our arrival, they would simply pull out their forces and abandon it. There's no point in committing a large force to defend a mere listening post. Naruto explained as Ross slight nodded in understanding. I actually came of my own accord. Anyone could have ferried you and Siri to this place, but I was actually getting bored of bombarding Felucia. Nevertheless, orders are orders and it's not our place to question them. But remember, this is an outpost near enough that it can monitor Kamino, after all, and you were already stationed there. Maybe they're worried about the potential of invasion. Ross stated as Naruto hummed at that. It made sense on paper, but Master Shakti was also overseeing the training of new clones, and she was on the Jedi Council and wasn't injured. Well, neither was he, but High Command didn't know that just yet. Sir? Naruto was broken out of his thoughts as he looked up to find Fox standing before him. For all his efforts with the 10th Army, Fox had been made one of the few clone surface marshals in the entire Republic Army, a position usually reserved for normal humans. The addition of a few gold stripes on his armor, alongside a new shoulder cape and what Naruto mockingly called a half-skirt, signified his increased rank. In terms of set rank, he was now equal to Naruto, capable of commanding a sector army. He was filling the vacancy as general of the 10th Army, while Naruto recovered. Naruto planned to make use of his new authority and split the 10th Army between the two of them for future campaigns. Hey Fox. I see that you're already good to go here as usual. Naruto questioned as Fox smiled. Oh, I'm just making sure everything's all set on the Akan before we depart for the mission. I also wanted to get a look over the 644th. You didn't do a half-bad job of training them up. Fox responded as Naruto nodded with a slight smile. How's King doing, by the way? I never actually heard if he was injured or not. He owed King his life after he was knocked out and almost executed at the hands of Count Dooku. He's fine. That bastard's so tough I don't think the entire droid army could take him down. Dooku didn't even scratch him. He hasn't been slacking off in his training while you've been gone either. Fox held King in very high esteem. Confident, bombastic, and capable as all hell, King was a model commander, and had gotten a bit of a reputation in the Gar after the reports of his duel with Dooku came in. Though, his Naruto began, but Fox knew what the blonde was going to ask and cut him off. Siri, of course. Teaching him all kinds of things. But of course he's dying to fight you again. Naruto only grinned in return. Then let's not keep him waiting, shall we? Naruto stated, resuming his walk towards the bridge. The sooner they get this mission done the better. He seems quite eager. Fox commented on Naruto's behavior. While he was still his usual self, Naruto seemed to be in a hurry. He wants to deal with this quickly, so he can head back to the front line. I don't blame him, this whole thing probably won't take more than half a day at best, Ross responded as Fox turned to her, wondering what she meant by that. I'm not sure what you mean by that, Admiral. Aren't we always heading towards the front lines? Fox questioned with a smirk. That was Fox's cheeky sense of humor. Yes, they were tasked with taking out a listing post, but it was in the border region of Separatist Republic space, so it was technically the front line, right? Ross simply shrugged. Front line or not, we got a job to do. Said as he too resumed his walk to the bridge. It wouldn't be long before everything was all set with the Legion loaded up and ready to go. Yagdhul, given domain. Yagdhul was a small barren planet in the Inner Rim. It served as the base for the Confederate First Fleet, the personal fleet of General Grievous, but more recently as the command center for the Separatists' war efforts in the southern Outer Rim. Within the hermetically sealed capital city, Asajj Ventress, the new leader of Dooku's Dark Acolytes, had been summoned to the planet to execute a mission that would hopefully turn the tide of the entire war. As she entered the conference room, she saw many of the major players for the Confederacy listening intently to a holocommunication with the true leader of the Confederacy, Lord Sidious. Count Dooku was in the midst of giving his final send-off, but as he moved to end the transmission, his master gave him a final warning. Do not fail me again, Dooku. I trust that Uzumaki and his band will be dealt with completely. This is our only chance to end his nuisance. It would be extremely difficult to create a second opening. Yes, my master. It will be done at once. Dooku spoke nervously as the transmission ended. Ventress looked on in disbelief. Either Sidious was very angry or Dooku was simply that concerned about failing to take down Uzumaki. Alas, Ventress pieced together her mission. Surely one Jedi cannot be so important to the Republic, even if he were on their High Council. Newt Gunray, chairman of the council, voiced his disbelief. If Naruto Uzumaki were on the Jedi Council, he would have a voice in general military affairs, and I believe this war would be over rather quickly. Our efforts to have him promoted preemptively hopefully slowed down his advancement onto the council. They don't like anyone going too far too quickly, but if we eliminate even one Jedi currently sitting on the council, I get the feeling that Uzumaki would replace him in a heartbeat. Dooku retorted, somewhat short with the former viceroy's ignorance. It wasn't every day that a Jedi was able to stand at his level. Neither Kenobi or Skywalker had been any threat to him on Geonosis or Renvar. But Naruto. I've seen his leadership firsthand, I know what he's capable of. Lord Sidious and Count Dooku are out of line to plan this operation. Wat Tambor was perhaps the only person on the council that was in total agreement. He had been pushing to have Uzumaki assassinated for months. Ventress took that as her cue. That's why the Count called me in. She stepped out of the entryway and moved next to her master's side. I'll be taking Uzumaki's head myself. You presume too much, Ventress. There's no chance you would succeed alone. You will be taking several of your acolytes along. Ventress briefly grimaced in response to her master's lack of confidence in her abilities. She hated her subordinates' consistent incompetence. Alone, no one in the Confederacy aside from myself or Grievous stands a chance against the likes of Uzumaki, but there is power in numbers that even he may underestimate. Coordinate carefully and plan your strike strategically. Uzumaki won't fall only to a handful of acolytes. You must wait until he is distressed or distracted. Ventress nodded but remained defiant. She had faced two of Uzumaki's subordinates on Renvar, and had done just fine delaying them. I get the feeling that your assassin isn't quite realizing the gravity of the situation, Count Dooku. Grievous had been staring down Ventress the entire time, having wanted to be the one to take out Uzumaki himself. He was quick to report her dismissal. So it seems. Dooku narrowed his eyes at his apprentice. Ventress, this is not some game we are playing for you to have fun. Naruto Uzumaki is a Jedi Master with more skill and power than most of the High Council. His subordinates are also highly capable, and they are secondary targets. But believe me when I say that if you blunder, if you do not take this threat seriously, if you do not kill Uzumaki, there will be severe consequences. And not just for you, but the whole of the separatist movement. Ventress grit her teeth but held her tongue. She smiled her sinister smile and bowed before Dooku, Grievous, and the separatist council. It will be done, my lords. Somewhere near the Larider system. The two transports dropped out of hyperspace after barely an hour of hyperspace travel, heading straight towards the potato-shaped planetoid before them. Their first priority was obviously to get in close and deploy. What's the report? Naruto questioned, waiting for the scan of the oddly shaped dwarf planet. Nothing much, sir. The only thing scanners are picking up is a large listening post and, as suspected, a moderate force of droids. Easily doable. Fox answered as Naruto narrowed his eyes. This seemed easy, too easy. The outpost didn't even have a planetary shield. The Republic should have sent one Venator to end the job with an orbital bombardment, but they were already here, and it wasn't as if they could call for reinforcements with the whole thing had a gag order on it. Alright, send out the jamming signal and set the ships down. Naruto ordered as the vessels were headed towards the planet at full speed. A problem with listening posts meant that they often picked up garbled or nonsensical series of transmissions. Naruto planned to use this to their advantage and mask their arrival. Naruto felt that all of the pieces to this puzzle were put in the wrong place. He's taken out of recovery despite still being listed as wounded. His requisition forces are 3 times what they needed to be. 2 Jedi Masters sent on a mission that could easily done by a knight, or even a capable surface marshal. A single Star Destroyer could bombard the outpost and complete the mission without any casualties. And to top it all off, the whole thing is classified as a black op that only High Command and the Chancellor is allowed to know about. Naruto was either a genius to realize, or the stooges at Republic High Command were complete and total morons. Listening Post Command Center. Aside from a bit of comms interference, the Separatist listening post was operating normally, according to the tactical droid placed in command. Little did the droid realize that he was in for a very long day. Sir, we are receiving an incoming transmission. A battle droid reported to the tactical droid, who quickly ordered the droid to bring it up. A hologram of Count Dooku came to life as the tactical droids stood at attention. My lord. The tactical droids stated, knowing who this way. 2 Republic transport ships are heading your way, Commander. Assume that any disruption in communications is likely them approaching. Ensure that they are destroyed. Leave no survivors. The Count ordered as the tactical droid nodded. Yes, Count Dooku, was his response before the transmission ended. When given specific parameters of probability, tactical droids could prove quite formidable. At the end of the transmission, however, the tactical droid took note of Count Dooku's lack of confidence. Ready the heavy anti-air cannons and pinpoint the source of that communication disturbance. Begin a blind surface-to-orbit bombardment in that area and mobilize our forces. The tactical droid ordered. It would use every possible resource at its disposal to carry out its task, even if it meant deploying the invasion force early. Roger, roger. The battle droid responded. In orbit, aboard the Aken. How long till touchdown? Ross questioned warily as Fox turned towards an officer for an ADA. Naruto's concerns had also put the gruff admiral on edge, but before Fox could get an answer, an explosion shook the ship. What was that? Naruto shouted as another explosion shook the ship. Sir, we are under fire from surface anti-air cannons. An officer shouted as the ship began to shake violently, as more shells from below peppered the ship's lower hull. Divert all power to shields and prep both ships for immediate hyperspace jump. Ross ordered, but it was too late. He looked outwards the bridge to the other transport, and to his horror one of the anti-air cannon got a lucky shoot, blowing out the engine block, causing the ship to nosedive. Sir, the ferry is going down. Fox pointed out as Naruto nodded grimly at that. Siri was on that ship with the 497th, but there was nothing he could do to help. Let's hope they can manage on their own, was Naruto's only response. There was nothing he could do but watch the ship go down. His own ship was in trouble and he had his hands full. Sir, we've just lost both our port side engines. An officer shouted as Naruto's mouth twisted into a snarl, baring his teeth in frustration. Now his ship was going to take a nosedive as well. You need to cushion the crash, Ross shouted to Naruto as he held on to dear life. Naruto nodded, already knowing that. He looked straight ahead of him, watching as the ship parted the clouds, causing the ground to become visible. Hold on, Naruto shouted as he extended his hands out, calling upon all of his might in this force to bring the ship at an angle to where it would crash land on its belly, rather than the nosedive it was currently doing. Ross and everyone else were holding as they saw the ground appear closer and closer. Anytime now, Ross shouted. He wasn't in the mood for dying today. Why don't you try course correcting a whole ship with your force powers? Naruto shouted back as sweat dripped from his forehead, veins popping out. Deep down Ross wanted to throw his hand out just to see if it would help, but they were too close to the ground. Erg. Naruto shouted as he finally was able to bring the ship to an angle, just as it crashed into the ground, causing it to skid across the surface. Hang on, Naruto shouted as he then shifted the force to bring the ship to an early stop. Looking around him, he was glad that the bridge was still intact, but some didn't make it. My head. Ross whined as he held his bleeding head, trying to stand firm. Glad I was wearing a helmet, Fox joked as he stood up. Ross rolled his eyes at that remark. Maybe he should start wearing a helmet as well. Everyone okay? Naruto questioned as he looked around as the various officers and troopers started to gather themselves. Seems like most of the bridge crew survived, sir. I'll go check the barracks for survivors and the hangars for transport, but considering our angle, I'm betting that most of our support craft are in the burning piles of scrap behind us, Fox stated, but he wasn't overly happy. Some of his brothers didn't make it, and Naruto saw that as he slightly frowned. Don't worry, Fox. We'll pay them back, Naruto stated as Fox nodded with determination. His brothers would not have died in vain. I suggest we meet up with Siri. Her ship didn't crash that far out, Ross suggested, looking towards the other transport that had crashed a few miles out. Naruto nodded at that. Then that is what we will do. Salvage any equipment possible, aids, walkers, whatever you find. Also gather our dead. We need to bury them, Naruto ordered. He would not let the dead to rot in this crash. He would bury them as he had done in the past. 2 hours later, the crashes had been both worse and not as bad as Naruto and Ross predicted. The ferry had collided with a rocky formation and spun out of control, landing upside down. The bridge crew had all died, and their barracks had been torn open. The 497th had lost over a third of its men, and the captains of the 3rd and 16th companies had been among the casualties. Stoic and Wildride, the captains of the 9th and 11th companies, had serious injuries and had become comatose. The 5th set up a medical encampment, and it wasn't long before Naruto and the 644th met up with them. The Ken was in complete tatters. The entire rear section had been grinded off by the crash, and there wasn't a single working vessel they could use to transport their wounded. Naruto took those he could to find the ferry, and returned with a few functioning AT-OTs that they converted into makeshift ambulances. All in all, they had just a handful of tanks and transports, no gunships, and of the 18,000 they had left with, only about 12,000 were still alive. Why do I get the feeling that this whole mission was a trap to begin with, and the idiots at high command were so paranoid they didn't realize they would be waiting for us? King commented as Fox nodded as the two walked around behind their general. The general knew that something wasn't right. This is supposed to be a listening post, and last I checked listening posts didn't have enough anti-air firepower to bring down 2 fully armed assault transports. Fox reasoned as King nodded. This whole operation didn't sit right with him. Then we'd best be on our guard. I don't think it will be long before the Seps send out a search party, King stated as he looked back to the advancing clones and sweet drops. And I'm telling you I won, Storm argued with his brothers as the others shook their head. No, you lost. Last I checked, I won that gamble. After all, my name is Gamble. How could I not win a bet? Gamble fired back as Storm narrowed his eyes. You wanna go at it, you cocky punk? Storm confronted Gamble, who smiled, ready for a fight. Storm was well known for his close combat skills, but Gamble was confident he was the stronger of the two. Stand down at 1C2. This is in gross violation of Blitz started to limp towards them, but was pushed back by Storm charging him with his shoulder. "You are your rules," he said with an eye roll as he raised his fist for a fight with Gamble, who mirrored him. However, before the two could fight, a shadow towered over them, causing them to stop. "Ladies, what's with this rambling?" The two rambunctious clones both turned and swallowed a lump. It was Bulk, and everyone rightly feared a fight with Bulk. His cloning deformity made the guy almost twice the size of an average clone. "Nothing," Storm said nervously as he resumed his walk. Bulk raised an eyebrow as he turned towards Gamble, who was whistling as if nothing ever happened. "I don't know how we've managed to survive this war so far," King commented as Fox chuckled. The 497th was made up of strange individuals, which to him was the greatest irony because they were all clones of the same man. "Who knows?" was Fox's only response. They got through the war so far, and they would get through the rest as well. With Siri was not having a good time. First her ship was shot down, then she broke her wrist in the crash, and now she was stuck managing field hospital caring for a legion and a half, most of whom were rookies that were freaking out. The crash had broken them. Some physically, others mentally. She was at least thankful it was only her left wrist and not her saber arm, and it wasn't actively hurting, so as long as she rested it, she would be fine. "Where's Naruto already?" Siri muttered. It had been some time since he and Fang had left on their reconnaissance mission. "We're actually getting a signal from the general just now." The clone quickly reported to her as she thanked the Force for being convenient. "Bring it up, already," she ordered as a hologram of Naruto appeared. "Siri, what's going on? Give me a status report," Naruto ordered as Siri nodded. "There are many dead and some have gone into shock. These clones were not ready for something like this," she said bluntly as some of the clones of the 644th nodded at that. Those words might be harsh, but they were true. "What's our total operational manpower?" Naruto asked grimly. 12,000 alive, but of that maybe about 3/4 are uninjured enough for active duty. Gather what you can and meet me at the coordinates I'm sending. Be ready to move out in an hour. It should take us at least that long to get there," Naruto ordered. While Siri became melancholic and blasé in times of crisis, Naruto became all business. "Wait, what? You heard what I said, right? There's no way we can," she protested, but Naruto had already shut off his holocom. Siri threw her uninjured arm into the air. "Alright folks, you heard the general. Gather yourselves and your weapons. We move out in an hour," Siri ordered as the clones quickly got to work. They might have been initially shocked and traumatized, but they were still part of the GAR. They had spent the past 10 years their entire lives training for this. How could they know that the coming battle would be nothing like the simulations? The hour passed quickly, and Siri had managed to almost piece together a full legion, after some of the less injured clones were discharged, which wasn't a lot as they had lost quite a bit of their support equipment, and considering the heavy fire they had come under from the beginning, then they would definitely be needing some heavy firepower. She had elected to leave behind Gamble, Bulk and Builder, to oversee the field hospital, along with their companies to defend against any incoming droid attacks. Gamble was the chief medic of the 497th, so got to work getting the troops back into fighting condition, and Builder and Bulk got to work building defensive fortifications out of the wreckage of both crashes. Blitz was named their commander, as he was without a doubt the most capable leader in the Legion, a trait that even Naruto had yet to fully realize. "General Tachi, I see Naruto's party." She was quickly updated by King. She nodded as dropped from her salvaged at RT, and headed to meet Naruto himself. The way down was depressing to say the least. The clones of the 644th were as ready as they could be for a fight. "There you are." Siri jumped as she heard Naruto's voice behind her. "Stop doing that," she almost shouted while Naruto stared back. It seemed he wasn't in his usual light-hearted mood. He had arrived a few minutes earlier before the main force. "Are our forces ready?" Naruto questioned sternly and stoically. 7,600 clones. Naruto hated this margin. The more time they spent sitting around, the more time the droids had to build up their forces. "I gathered what I could. Do you have any intel on the enemy's location?" she questioned him as Naruto nodded. "Yes, and their base is massive, far too large to just be a listening post. It also has a powerful shield generator strong enough to deflect your average orbital bombardment. This place was likely intended to be a forward base for an invasion of Kamino," Naruto said as he pulled out a holodisc and activated it. "The Separatist base is located within a canyon system. There are two ways to approach it, from the north and the south," Naruto stated as he pointed at a fork in the canyon system. "Dividing our forces?" she questioned, but Naruto shook his head. "It would normally be our best shot, but there's no way we can coordinate a significant attack with our limited number. The droids would just focus down one group and then turn on the other. Infiltrating the base together is our best bet. Once we're inside and have the droids' attention, then we can split up and force them to follow us. Our first priority is sending out a distress signal. We're doomed if we can't call in reinforcements ASAP." Siri nodded slowly. Their comms was down and they had no shuttles to get them off-world. This was their only chance. But there are a few things we need to do before we can get off this rock. First, we need to get a distress signal out to Kamino. Any transport will be shot down by those AA guns, and so would the fleet. Which brings me to objective number 2. We need to lower their shield from the command center. Naruto began the most troubling part of the briefing, so that the fleet can destroy the anti-air guns with an orbital bombardment before the cannons can take aim and blow the fleet to hell. The 13th Company captain and master of all things artillery, Crackshot, spoke up. Correct. We don't have anything left that could take down those guns. The fleet can only come in range after the shield is down, so they can do the job for us, and that takes us to our last objective. Securing assist transport so that we're not in the base when the fleet blows it to hell. Naruto finished the briefing and shut off the holodisk. That one doesn't sound too hard. I can handle that, even with my wrist. Siri. You're right, it would be the easiest job, but there's one little problem. Naruto gestured to the docking area, which was currently occupied by 3 Trade Federation core ships, with the 4th currently docking. That all but confirmed it. The CIS was definitely planning an attack on Kamino. That's a pretty big problem, Uzumaki. Ross rubbed his bandaged forehead after breaking his long silence. A single core ship held over 100,000 droids. Their small force would be outnumbered almost 75-1. Siri, you're not in the best condition with that wrist, so once we're inside, I want you to take a team to disable the power relay for the shield. The engineering bays should be the most undefended once we make a big enough noise somewhere else. Naruto gave her his orders, and she didn't question them. I'm going to. Ross piped up, looking between Naruto and Siri, who were both a little dumbfounded. Naruto started to dismiss the whole idea. You sure about that, Ross? This is going to be heavy ground combat. I don't think you're. Believe it or not, I can handle myself in a firefight, Uzumaki. Besides, you said it yourself. Tachi is wounded. You'll need someone else able to complete the mission if anything happens to her. This earned Ross an elbow in the gut from Siri, who Ross swore whispered ass under her breath before giving him a warm smile. That's one objective down. As for the other 2, we'll need to infiltrate the command center to patch into their comm systems. The 1st Company will take care of that. King volunteered, and Naruto breathed a sigh of relief, having hoped King would volunteer. The 1st Company had thankfully suffered no casualties in the crash. They were a small team that wouldn't be easily noticed, but were also capable enough. Then I guess that leaves me and you to capture the transport, General? Fox joked. Naruto almost smiled, but the weight of the situation had affected Naruto in a different way than most. He didn't back away from stress, he doubled down and tripled his efforts, which often only caused him more stress. I guess it does. Fang, Storm, Hefty, Spirit, you coming with me? Tricky, I want you to take the 15H Company and do your thing. Get in there and cause some mayhem. Do whatever you can to confuse their commander and make them send droids all over the place. The more chaos and confusion the better. Got it, boss. Tricky, the captain of Magic Company, was renowned for misdirecting and confusing the enemy, which was a lot easier to do when most of your opponents are droids dumber than nails. His efforts would be invaluable. I wish you the best of luck, brother. Captain Spirit, commander of the 14th Shao Company, roared out bombastically as the rest of his company cheered. Spirit and his troops were average in combat, but they made up for it with unrelenting gumption and an unbreakable morale. Spirit was long considered to be the soul of the 497th, hence his nickname. Siri, I want you to take the hull of the 644th. Most of them are still back at base recovering from the shock, but if there's anyone who can teach them real combat, it's you. Take Crackshot, Flash and their companies so they have some examples to follow. The rest of you, you're with me. We're gonna need all the men we can get. Naruto steeled himself as he prepared for a long march into hell. Meanwhile at the droid base, shore up our defenses. The Republic survivors will surely attempt to commandeer one of our transports. The tactical droid ordered the droids as the base was on high alert. It knew that there were 2 paths of attacks the Republic could use to attack the base with, and it would defend both paths. The door slid open, causing the droid to turn around and see a white-skinned Dathomirian. Ventress. She was followed in by 5 others clad in dark clothing. Status report. Ventress questioned the droid. She was sent out with a few dark acolytes and a few core ships to reinforce the outpost, and to destroy the small Republic force that was shot down. The Republic vessels have been shot down, but there are signs of survivors. It will take time for them to reorganize and carry out an attack. The tactical droid reported as Ventress raised an eyebrow. Did you not send out a force to find them? She questioned the droid, which thought over the question. No. The droid questioned as Ventress shook her head. Droids were droids in the end, it seemed. Then do it. The crash that's significant would have several wounded. They can't have gotten far. I have another mission I must attend to. Ventress stated as she turned and began to make her way out with her entourage. They were assigned to kill Naruto Uzumaki, someone who was starting to become a major threat to their master. With Naruto, the march wasn't all that long after all, partly due to their increased pace. In this situation, time was critical. The more time they spent, the more clones that wouldn't receive adequate medical attention, and the lower their chances became. I don't like this, it's too quiet. Surely they must have seen us coming by now. Storm commented. Everyone was on alert. They had their so late marching up with their two AT-RTs, one in the front and one bringing up the rear. Looking around, he saw how seriously exposed to attacks they were from all sides. The droids could attack from above the canyon, or they could block the rear and funnel them into a trap. Just keep your eyes peeled. Fox kept shifting his eyes all around. Naruto nodded in affirmation as he kept on looking forward. This a trap written all over it. I'm not sure when or what, but Naruto was cut off as he heard the sound of explosives going off. Looking back, he saw that the canyon walls at the very rear began to collapse, causing the rear to be blocked off. Incoming. The clone shouted as Naruto looked back and saw a vast number of droids marching from the front. Quickly igniting his saber, he started to deflect incoming fire. Take cover. Siri, get inside the base. Naruto shouted as the troopers quickly dived for cover while returning fire. Siri leapt from the lead AT-RT and rushed inside with Ross and the 644th close behind her, deflecting a few bolts that came too close for comfort. Ross briefly tripped over in the rush, but Siri grabbed him by his collar and hauled him inside and to his feet. At the crash site, Bulk, we need those heavy guns over here. Builder shouted. He had quickly identified solid areas that they could use as cover and return fire from. On it. Bulk shouted as he started to make his run carrying two turrets with a few of his brothers carrying the ammunition crates. He quickly dropped the turrets as he looked over the horizon to see waves of battle droids approaching. The search party had finally caught them. Bulk shouted with all his might, which was heard by every clone in the camp. Blitz. We're gonna have company. With Naruto. Suppressing fire. The 12th Company Captain Hefty shouted as he used his DC-23 minigun to lay down fire. His company followed his actions, providing suppressive fire for the others as they ran across the open ground into the base. Forward. Storm shouted as his and King's companies charged forward in the droid lines with Naruto, pushing the droids back. As they did so, from further back the droid lines a massive spider-like droid began to slowly move up. It had a balloon-like head that had 3 laser turrets underneath each eye. However the droid could do anything, its head was blasted right off of it by an 8. Excellent aim as always, crack shot. Spirit praised heartily. Nothing was ever subtle or quiet with him around. Just doing my part. He reposed as he fired more mass driver shots downrange, clearing the path. As the droids were being pushed back, Crackshot placed a final shot right into the side of the canyon wall, collapsing and trapping the droids in their own trap. I hope we're getting the worst of it, at least. Naruto said to himself as he deflected blaster fire. With Blitz, the situation at the camp was not good at all. Yet the droids had elected to attack them in full force first. They hadn't even managed to fully man their defenses before they came under fire. The 644th boys had gotten distracted by the sound of explosives going off, focusing too much on finding a source they would never be able to see, and in that moment the droids began their attack. Blitz had elected to mount the 2nd Company on speeder bikes, and they began a mad rush at the droids from all sides in a complicated crisscross pattern that he developed. That managed to distract the droids down enough to get the soldiers that were still able to move into Builder's makeshift scrap bunkers, but there were at least 50,000 droids in this formation. There was no way they could hold out for very long. With Siri and Ross. We need to lose them, now. Siri shouted, as she sprinted through the base with an entire regiment of droids in hot pursuit. Ross was a different story. He was an admiral and his expertise lay in space warfare. Ground combat was not a field he excelled in, and he was constantly lagging behind Siri and the clones, but he would be damned if he let the Jedi do all the work here. Borrowing an E5 blaster from a commando draught Siri had cut down, Ross took aim, and began blasting the door controls he passed by, in an effort to cut off their pursuers. They had split off from Naruto a lot sooner than planned, and with far fewer clones than expected. They were down to an injured Jedi, an admiral, and maybe 1,000 clones, and that number was waning fast. But there was no turning back now and they would have to make do. There was no way they could take on that many droids. After what seemed like an eternity of running through hallways, they had managed to reach a command console and seal the blast doors behind them. The reprieve was a brief one, as they soon came under attack by 2 platoons of B-1s, which was much more manageable. Fighting alongside the clones, Ross took notice of their tenacity up close. Even these 644th Greens were capable fighting machines. Ross had determined that those in the 644th that had made it this far with them were the best of the best, future elite soldiers. They hadn't cracked under pressure after the crash, they hadn't panicked when they were caught in a trap, and they sure as hell weren't dying without a fight. Blaster fire rained down upon them, and the sense of being trapped, outnumbered, and powerlessness began to settle in. He realized just how vulnerable the clones felt during battle, and yet they still fought, even if it was a suicidal mission. That's when Ross heard a scream from behind him. Siri had been caught off guard as was hit by stray blaster fire. One hit directly in her upper chest and the other her right thigh. Even with these new wounds, Siri pushed onward, ordering a tactical retreat, and Ross followed down the hallway, before suddenly grabbing Siri and pulling her into a side hall. A few clones stopped with them, but most walked right into the open room ahead, and were face to face with an entire squad of Droidekas, shields deployed and guns ready. As the B1s and B2s closed in from all sides, the 600 or so clones that had been caught in the trap ahead and had no choice but to surrender. It wasn't long before the droids turned their attention to the small group that had escaped the trap. "We'll cover you, ma'am. You two need to make a run for it. Take my Bravo company and make a break for it. Captain Flash, cover her," the clone stated. He was one of the captains, the 644th, CT-553, and unlike his brothers, he was not afraid of the coming storm. "I'm not leaving you behind. I am not leaving anyone behind," Ciri responded as she clutched her wound. The pain was becoming greater from the blaster shots. She had been lucky when the blaster missed her vital organs. "With all due respect, General, this is what we were made for. To do our duty for the Republic and give our lives for it if need be. You're injured and in no condition to fight, and Naruto told us how much of a high-value target the Admiral is. I cannot let the enemy capture or kill you. You have to go, now," the captain shouted before he removed his helmet, turned to his men, and started giving out orders to cover their retreat. Ciri snarled as she was about to approach the captain and tell him off, but stumbled and almost fell, being caught just in time by Ross. "Damn it," she thought as her hand held the lightsaber tightly. "That captain is right, Ciri, we have to go." Ross spoke as Ciri looked at him, a bit betrayed by what he had said. "And leave them all to die. I will not let." She couldn't finish her sentence as another wave of pain washed over her. Ross frowned at that. "Ciri, not many people survive a direct blast to the chest, especially not without armor. You're lucky to be alive as is, but if we have any hopes of getting of this planet, this is it. I know you want to save them, but you cannot save everyone," Ross proclaimed, causing Ciri to stare at him for a moment in disbelief. She remembered those same words she told Naruto, the same words she told Fierce, and now she was in the same situation she had warned against. "Fine. But don't you dare die on me," she replied as she stood up and began to head towards the opening, Ross quickly following after her. The captain nodded as he turned to his brothers and fellow captains. Flash, the only other captain present from the 497th, gathered Rush and Bravo companies, a total of about 100 and changed troops, and began to run off with Ciri and Ross in tow. "Provide suppressive fire, men. For the Republic." Crackshot shouted as the troopers let out a war cry, blasting at every droid in their sights, as the droids marched closer and closer. This would be their last stand, their finest hour. But Ventress in the command center. Ventress smiled as she observed the battle from the command center, and noticed everything was going as planned. The clones and Jedi had been split up prematurely and were going to separate objectives. Ciri's forces had been quickly neutralized, and most had surrendered. The Jedi woman and the Admiral had managed to slip into the base, but they would be dealt with soon. The reports had come in that the enemy field hospital had been captured with relative ease, but she was not pleased with how much time it had taken them to deal with the ragtag bunch of injured clones. "You two, take care of those intruders. The blonde woman and the eye patch are the secondary targets Dooku mentioned. High value, and do not underestimate her. She's wounded, but she's still a Jedi Master. Capture Mr. Eye Patch alive if you can. Dooku wants him on our side in the future. And I shouldn't need to warn you what will happen if they manage to take down those shields." Ventress's threat carried two meanings as ordered the two acolytes immediately behind her. If they didn't succeed, they would either die in the Republic's bombardment or die by her hand. They nodded in acknowledgement and quickly set out to assassinate Ciri. Ventress kept her eyes on the battle, and saw that Naruto was making significant progress towards the hangar. "The four of us will be going for the head." She set her eyes on Naruto. She ordered the last of the acolytes to follow her. Naruto was an extremely capable opponent, and they would need to choose the perfect moment to engage him. Then, she noticed the officers of the 497th were also contributing significantly. "We'll have to take care of those pesky officers too. That surface marshal in particular." Ventress gestured to the holoscreen. If the 497th leadership could be wiped out, then the rest would follow soon after. With that, the four of them set out to assassinate Naruto. With Ross sighed as he leaned back to sit down in the hull. They had managed to lose their pursuers thanks to the sacrifice of their comrades, but Ciri's condition was worsening by the second. She'd been fading in and out of consciousness for a few minutes now. "Damn droids," Ciri whispered to herself, causing Ross to get her attention. He looked towards her as he saw how frustrated she was. "Why wage war? So many people have to suffer and die for nothing," she ranted to herself. She had fought in many battles, and she had saw so many had died, and all for what? A war that made no sense. Not to her, not to the clones, and not for anyone that had to fight and die in it. It's not a pointless cause, you know. She was broken out of her thoughts by Ross, who was checking his blaster. "And why is that?" she questioned him, irritated but also slightly curious. "Because I can understand how the separatist worlds feel. They have been left out, forgotten by the Republic and the Senate, whose only concerns seem to fall on the core worlds. For some, especially those in the mid or outer rim, the Republic truly doesn't care about the harm they do to the lower classes for the sake of inner rim trade. Half of the outer rim is completely forgotten and left in the hands of the Hutts. I wasn't the least bit surprised when the separatists declared open rebellion," Ross explained as Ciri frowned. If the separatists felt so left out, then they should have talked, not built a secret army. War is not always the answer. What would they do after they win the war? Gain independence, force the Republic to pay for the war. That would only plant the seeds for another war. Ciri reasoned as Ross shook his head. As much as she didn't understand, she was also right. If the Cis won independence through a military victory rather than diplomacy, then there would undoubtedly be another war in the near future, and it would be far more brutal than this one. Both sides had rather small militaries after centuries of peace and demilitarization. The sequel would not have the same handicap on violence. I don't disagree with you, Ciri, but that doesn't change the fact that the Senate should have voted to acknowledge their secession. Trust me, I know why so many worlds sided with Dooku. Ross wasn't necessarily opposed to the violence hell, it had at least made his job a hell of a lot more interesting, but he was definitely opposed to the Republic on this matter, only staying out of loyalty. What the hell would a pretty boy dog of the military like you know about it? Ciri shot back. Ross briefly considered the pretty boy compliment, but realized that people weren't often convinced of your beliefs if they didn't know your story. I was born on Itseri, Pemblahov district. Ross dropped the mother of all proton torpedoes that immediately silenced Ciri after a brief gasp. Whether it was out of shock or just another byproduct of the pain, Ross wasn't sure, but he decided to elaborate anyways. I can tell you know of the place's reputation, and I can tell you that I know firsthand how the Republic has never given a damn about what happens to the people there. My own mother was heavily addicted to all kinds of other illegal narcotics that purchasable openly on the streets of that lawless swamp. By the time my brother Roland was 6, she had already drained her savings. She managed to get clean long enough for me to be born healthy later that year, but she went right back to using after just a few weeks. She got us into debt, deeply into debt. Shirt off. Ross began to remove his heavily decorated navy coat that he'd always kept so pristine, ripping off the sleeves and tearing at the fabric. Ciri realized his intent and removed the jacket of her red pilot suit, and then her shirt and undergarment, leaving her bare chest fully exposed. The clones looked away hastily, some blushing slightly under their helmets, but Ross remained focused as he began to dress her most serious wound first. Ross, I don't know why Ciri began, but she winced in pain as Ross began tightening her improvised bandages. She was too weak to give him her sympathies. It's fine, but I'm sure you do know what happens to addicts that can't pay their debts. First, they took my father and sold him into slavery. I don't remember him much, I was only 4. I guess they didn't want to deprive themselves of a repeat customer, but they came for her a year later. For a while it was just me and my brother living in the streets. We followed the only examples we knew, the gangsters that kept visiting us, and pretty soon we had our own little gang, and we were dealing death sticks ourselves. We took over the whole district, then most of the city, and kicked the bastards that sold our parents to the curb. Ross realized that he didn't have enough fabric to tie the bandage, so he removed his eye patch and snapped the band, using it to extend and tie everything together. Ciri took the moment to observe his left eye in close detail. He never removed his eye patch for anything, even wearing it in his sleep. She quickly observed that there was no trace of an eye. Skin had been grafted over his socket, the only indication there ever was an eye there were the numerous scars. Ross really didn't need the eye patch, but the nerves had been completely burned, and he couldn't use a cybernetic replacement. It was probably more a matter of pride than any insecurity over the rather tame wound. He helped her replace her purple undershirt, but her jacket became his next victim as he cut and tore out the inner cloth lining. Is that why you were dedicated to hunting pirates and slavers? Because of your parents? Ross remained silent, but Ciri knew the answer as he supported her back while she slid down her leggings, so that he could wrap her thigh as well. How'd you end up in the Republic Navy after all that? She asked a different question that she hoped was slightly less traumatic. Zells, believe it or not. Ross surprised Ciri once again with that tidbit of information. She stared in silent disbelief for a moment. Zells as in Zellsmark. You subordinate, Rear Admiral of my 14th Corps. She winced again as Ross wrapped her leg. She had overexerted herself on the leg, and the wound had gone very badly. She needed medical attention fast. These bandages would not last long with this much bleeding. The one and only, he was with the security forces back then. Ross smiled briefly, reminiscing their very first and very awkward meeting. He came to Itseri to investigate the activity of yours truly. He was surprised to see a teenager running a street gang, and so effectively. We tried fighting them off, but this was the Republic Constabulary. We didn't last long against them, even with my countermeasures. Instead of arresting me, Zal simply took me under his wing. He saw my potential and now, 20 years later, I'm an admiral in the Republic Navy. Hell, I'm the admiral as far as most people are concerned. Ross again did what he could to support her, so she could put her red pilot leggings back on, but she was still strained greatly pulling them up. What happened to your brother? Ciri asked between breaths. I don't know. I know that Roll and the rest of the gang each got at least a decade in prison. They've probably all been released by now. He's probably not exactly eager to see me again after I abandoned him to take Cellsdeal. Ross answered wearily. The day of the raid was last day he had spoken with his brother Roland. Ross looked up to notice that Ciri had fallen unconscious again. She probably didn't hear a word he just said. This battle really is too much for me, Ross said as he rubbed his calf tenderly. All this running was really getting to him as well. Then allow us stand prematurely. Ross quickly stood back up as they saw two females walking down the hallway. One a brown-skinned Zabrak, the other a dark blue Twi'lek. They both wore dark robes and had silver cylinders on their belts lightsabers. So Dooku's little girls have come out to play. Ross put up a false bravado behind his mockery, but he knew this was a fairly awful situation. Droids he could handle. But dark side users? No thanks. In a snap decision, Ross and the clones immediately pulled up their blasters and began firing. As the two acolytes activated their red sabers and began deflecting the bolts back into the clones, Ross took advantage of this brief moment to grab the unconscious Ciri and place her in a fireman carry, remarking how light the blonde was for her height. He also grabbed their dissected clothing before breaking into the fastest sprint he could manage. It wasn't long before the clones either fled or were cut down by the acolytes, and Ross quickly made use of Ciri's pilot jacket, tossing it at the pursuing acolytes. It didn't slow them down much as they cut through it. Ross then went to throw his coat, briefly hesitating for a moment when he saw his cross of glory, but quickly relented and let it breeze behind him as well. Using his now free hand, he grabbed the E5 blaster and turned around to aim for the Twi'lek acolyte that had her vision obscured by the jacket. However, the Zabrak reacted with the reflexes of a Force user and electrocuted him with a brief barrage of Force lightning. Ross stumbled and fell to the ground, reeling in pain. Ciri's limp body went rolling through the hallway before coming to a stop a few meters ahead. He turned onto his back to blast the acolyte again, but he was quickly subdued by the Force and thrown against the wall, knocking him out as well. Ventress said to bring this one back alive. Dooku's hoping to convert him to her side. The Zabrak woman said, I can see why, the bastard almost killed me twice. I guess I should be grateful that you covered me. The Twi'lek half thanked her Zabrak partner. Apparently, he's actually an admiral, and we Dooku's definitely needs more of those. Seriously, this guy's even better on a ship. Could've fooled me, asshole. The Twi'lek delivered a heavy kick into Ross's unconscious side. The two were pulled away by the hum of a lightsaber. They turned and found the purple blade responsible. Step away from him, you bitch. Ciri growled as she struggled to stay on her feet, having woken up from the impact. She limped slightly as she moved to defend Ross. The two acolytes began their offensive, moving in sync to get her off guard. At first she was able to manage the incoming strikes, however, her grievous wounds were not helping her one bit, and with each strike the pain was only growing. How can you defeat us when you're half dead already? The cocky Twi'lek reminded, a smirk plastered on her face as Ciri blocked an incoming strike that strained her broken wrist gravely. Ciri pushed the offending acolyte back, however before she could go on the attack, she was once again forced to go on the defense, as the Zabrak began focusing on her right side. Her leg. The Zabrak pointed out as they began to target the side of her weakened leg, and overwhelm the Jedi Master with pain. However, that was not necessary as their strikes were enough to cause the exhausted Ciri to falter and fall to her knees. She raised her saber in defiance to block one last strike, but her wrist finally gave way, and her blade was knocked out of her hands. Now you die. Any last words, girlie? The Twi'lek stated as she raised her saber, but couldn't bring down the strike, as she was struck in the back of her head by a blaster bolt, falling to the ground dead. Samar. The Zabrak shouted in surprise, and she turned back to see the Admiral kneeling behind them, his shirt singed and tattered from her lightning. Third time's the charm, it seems. Ross panted, still a bit disoriented as he had just been electrocuted and thrown against the wall. The Zabrak acolyte growled as she quickly deflected a few blasts from the Admiral, who calculated the angle of reflection and dodged accordingly. Ciri held on for a few more seconds as Ross kept rushing towards the acolyte before blacking out once again. Ross grunted as the Zabrak rushed forward and disarmed him with a high kick. But Ross took advantage of her weakened footing and tackled the acolyte hard, knocking her saber out of her hands. Dragging her to the ground, Ross began pummeling her face as hard as he could. He kept going at it long after the Zabrak's face became bloody, and she passed out from concussive force. Grabbing Ciri's lightsaber, Ross began shaking the Jedi in an effort to keep her conscious. Wake up, Ciri. We've got to get out of here. Ross said to himself as he rapidly took an air. Ciri was half awake, which was better than nothing. Grabbing his blaster, he lifted Ciri to her feet, arm around her shoulder, and quickly made a run for it down the hall. He was too weak to carry her on his back anymore, and they still had to take down the shield. Getting Ciri out of danger would be his first priority, then he should be able to figure out what to do next. Thanks for listening. I do hope you enjoyed. If you want the next part of this video, like, subscribe and comment down below, and turn on the bell notification. And also check out other videos that I have created and enjoy. See you in the next video. Peace.